You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host, and today the topic is the whole picture. Why mental health isn't just brain chemistry. So what is it that I'm talking about? Well, I was looking through YouTube the other day and some other social media outlets, and one of the things that struck me, especially when I was looking at YouTube, was the number of videos that were there about ADD, ADHD, and the theme in the majority of cases was basically that your condition is all about brain chemistry. Now, why might that be? Well, there's a number of reasons why that might be. One of them is that we have spent a considerable amount of time in our culture medicalising psychological distress and disorders. And what do I mean by that? Well, one of the processes or theories or frameworks that operate in science, and especially medical science, is fundamentally what's called reductionism. Okay, so don't freak out, guys. I'm going to make this as simple as possible. Okay, so what is reductionism? Well, fundamentally, reductionism is essentially the idea that we can understand complex systems by breaking them down into simpler, more manageable parts. Now, this approach has been tremendously successful in fields like physics and chemistry. But guess what? When it comes to psychology and neuroscience, the story is fundamentally not that straightforward. So it raises the question about well, why is this approach, or why has it become so prevalent? Why is it so tempting? Because, well, firstly, at first glance, reductionism seems like a really good fit. The brain's an organ, after all. You know, we can scan it, measure neurotransmitter levels, identify specific regions associated with particular functions. So a reductionist approach seems like a tidy way of going about examining and understanding the brain. So from there, it seems to be logical that it should give us a direct route to diagnosis and treatment. And subsequently, the treatment is often medication. However, and you've guessed it, it ain't that simple. There are some significant problems with reductionism and how we apply it, especially to psychology and psychiatry. Firstly, there's the problem of oversimplification. One of the most glaring issues is in fact that it oversimplifies the whole problem. Imagine thinking of a complex painting as just a collection of individual brush strokes. You'd miss the entire essence of the artwork. So the same happens when we reduce psychological disorders to a mere imbalance or imbalances in brain chemistry. So the next problem that we got with this is stigmatization. So when you tell someone that their depression is just due to a serotonin imbalance. And by the way, that theory is actually quite questionable. You're also indirectly telling them that they are fundamentally flawed. And a lot of that leads to potential social stigma and self-stigma. The other issue is that there's what we call the interdisciplinary neglect. Psychology is a multidisciplinary field. It borrows from sociology, history, philosophy, and a whole bunch of more areas of knowledge and study. A reductionist approach ignores crucial insights from these disciplines, creating a tunnel vision effect. The next issue is, and this is a particularly challenging one, is that we are risking inaccurate or incomplete treatment. If we only look at neurotransmitters, we might prescribe medication when perhaps a lifestyle change or psychotherapy could be more effective, or at least should be a complement medication. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So, what are the alternatives? Well, fundamentally, the alternative to reductionism is to take a much more holistic, multidisciplinary approach. Models like the biopsychosocial model takes into account what's going on biologically, psychologically, and socially, especially in understanding and treating psychological disorders. By acknowledging the complexity, we can begin to tailor more effective individualised treatments. So, am I just simply pointing the finger here at ADD, ADHD? No, I'm not. We have had this propensity to apply reductionism across a whole range of psychological distress and disorders. I've got a special announcement about how you can work with me. Since starting this podcast, I've had a lot of inquiries from listeners asking how they can work with me on a one-to-one basis. Now, I've finally managed to free up some time to work with about 5 clients privately. Typically, we'll work together for 6 months, applying the ideas I discuss here to help you lead a fulfilled, meaningful, and happy life, and a well-rounded life. If that's something you'd be interested in, drop me an email at gunter@goodmengreat.com and we'll be in touch. So let me take a moment to take a deep dive in the alternative approach. Okay, we talked about the biopsychosocial model. We've acknowledged that there is a complexity and that we can probably tailor more effective individualised treatments. Okay. There's a particular researcher and therapist who I have an enormous amount of respect for in this particular area, and his name is Gabor Mate. He's a Canadian physician and author, and he offers a nuanced perspective on attention deficit disorder that diverges from mainstream medical understanding. He argues that ADD is not merely a biological condition to be treated with pharmaceuticals, but rather it's a complex interplay of genetic, environmental, and psychosocial factors. Now, according to Mate, the root causes of ADD can often be traced back to early childhood experiences, particularly stressful or traumatic ones. He emphasizes that the developing brain of a child is significantly affected by the emotional environment, and conditions like ADD can arise when the child experiences a lack of nurturing, chronic stress, or emotional trauma. Such experiences can alter the neurochemical pathways in the brain, affecting attention, self-regulation, and impulse control. Now, Mate is particularly critical of reductionist approaches that view ADD solely through the lens of neurochemistry. and advocate for pharmaceutical interventions as the primary mode of treatment. While he doesn't entirely dismiss the role of medication, he argues for a more holistic understanding and approach. This would not only include medical treatments, but also psychological counselling, emotional support, and changes in the environment to help manage and perhaps even alleviate the symptoms of ADD. So, in summary, what Gabor Mate advocates for is a holistic, a biopsychosocial approach to understanding and treating ADD. He emphasises the importance of early childhood experiences, the emotional environment, and the limitations of reductionist medication-only approaches. His views challenge us to look at ADD as a complex, multifaceted condition that requires an equally nuanced treatment strategy. So let me come back to the idea of reductionism. Now, there's no question that it has its merits. But it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and especially in fields as complex as psychology and neuroscience. The path to understanding the human mind is multifaceted, requiring lots of perspectives. And so this is particularly the case when we're looking at diagnosis. If I'm only interested in someone's neurology or neurochemistry, I'm not going to be exploring in significant detail that person's birth experience, their first 7 years of life, then the next 7 years of life. We need to have an approach that clearly identifies the developmental stages and processes that go on. Things like attachment styles from parent to child and child to parent. We need to look at significant life events. And, my experience, the average client actually doesn't necessarily know what's significant. I get a lot of people who will describe their family dynamics as being okay. But on closer examination, what we find is that there was often a lack of affection, that there was some significant drama. Mightn't be traumatic, but there was enough, maybe emotional dysregulation from one or both parents, or drinking issues, or problems with affairs between parents or from parents that had an impact on the child. A lot of this is highly impactful on how a child actually develops emotionally, but also behaviourally. One of the big problems in our society to date is that everybody is really busy and everybody is on devices. So immediately, one of the issues that we've got are attachment issues. And those attachment issues often lead to things like anxiety or impulse control problems or more attachment problems. We get dysregulated behaviour. So it's really, really important from a clinician's point of view to be able to have a rounded perspective of what is the underlying fabric in which that client comes to me. It's like the background and the foreground needs to be able to be connected so that we come up with an appropriate approach for treatment. Medication isn't going to do it. Simply regulating someone's neurochemistry is not going to do that. And I constantly see things like biohacking, ADD and dopamine, all these things. And in a lot of cases, we actually are not necessarily all that clear about what these neurochemicals do in the bigger picture. We might have an understanding of what an aspect of that neurochemical is about. but it doesn't necessarily hang together that it's exactly the same when it's connected into the organism or the whole system. It's a bit like the analogy that I sometimes use with this is imagine someone handing you a microchip and asks you to explain what that microchip does. Now, in some ways, I could go, well, it's obviously a microchip out of a, computer or a TV or something, but I could not explain to you exactly what its function is unless I had some idea of where in that machine it came from and how it was connected. So this topic is actually hugely important because, again, we're wanting to reduce everything to little categories and stick things in little boxes. And human beings simply do not go into little boxes. Thankfully, if it was that simple, we'd already have much, much more effective, pharmaceutical treatments. The magic bullet doesn't work. We know that. So I want you to take that away and think about it, because this has the opportunity for you to think about your behaviour in relationship with someone, maybe it's your child or a family member or a partner who has or is trying to deal with something like ADD. That if they're simply relying on medication, they may not be getting the best bang for their buck, basically. So on that note, I'm going to leave you, and I hope that's stimulated some food for thought, and I'll possibly come back to this topic at some stage, maybe from a different angle. In the meantime, take care, inspire yourself, inspire others, and change is a good thing. Till next time, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.